are here taping this at the Westport Library. It is Marc Hartog's anniversary and also EMS week.
Yes.
So who knew? Marc Hartog is the Deputy Director of Westport Volunteer Emergency Medical Service. They're one of our town's most important and, I think, often unrecognized organizations. You hope you never meet them.
That's right.
But when you do, they are there for you 24/7, 365. And some of what WVEMS does is, I think, eye-opening. I think people are going to learn a lot today. So, Marc, welcome to 06880, the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I'm thrilled and honored to be here.
So let's start out, first of all, with Westport Volunteer Emergency Medical Service 101.
Okay.
What is it? What isn't it? What do you do? How do you differ from regular EMS?
Well, in actuality, not to correct you right off the top, but
I made a lot of mistakes.
I'm actually the director of Westport Emergency Medical Service.
Okay.
So what most people don't know, virtually nobody in town really recognizes the fact that there are two separate, distinct organizations that work very tightly together to provide the medical care, the emergency medical care to the people of Westport. Westport Emergency Medical Service is a town-run and town-operated service. We are actually a division of the town. We are actually very unusual throughout the country, and I think there's only maybe one or two others in the state of Connecticut. We are actually a civilian division of the Westport Police Department. So one of the deputy chiefs of the police department, since the inception of this agency, is on paper the director of Westport EMS. And then I would be the number two person answering to him. And I'm basically in charge of operations and personnel and pretty much everything that goes on. So we are Westport EMS, and we have some paid staff, full-time paid staff that are town employees. Then there's Westport Volunteer EMS, which is a 501c3 nonprofit a corporation that has basically two missions. One is to provide the volunteer staffing for Westport EMS's ambulance, and the other is the fundraising. They do the amazing job of fundraising, which, as we and they like to say, pays for everything from ambulances to the Band-Aids inside them and everything in between. So we are, like I said, we're two separate organizations that work very closely together. The reality is that between the paid staff and the volunteers, as you mentioned, we operate 24/7 out of our headquarters. Our personnel are on duty in the building at all times. We have enough personnel on duty 7 days a week, basically from 7 a.m. till 11 p.m. to normally put out two ambulances, which are right now. I just turned off my radio. Right now, we have two ambulances out on calls as we speak. And then from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., we have one ambulance on duty typically. But also with the volunteers who carry, we don't carry pagers anymore. That's 1980s tech. We carry on their cell phones. They have an app. So when we need additional personnel, either for another ambulance call or, God forbid, the multi-casualty incident happens, something like that, we send out messages on that. People can actually on the phones listen to the radio and respond. And so we get volunteers that will come in, and some of our paid staff that live locally will come in should that extra need be there.
How did it develop that there's these two organizations?
Yeah.
Which sounds a little unwieldy, even though you say it works pretty well.
It works well because, as I said, the operation of the ambulance services falls under the direction of Westport EMS and the police department. And so the volunteers, when they're on the ambulance, they are under our direction. But they have their own kind of mission, which I said is that fundraising as well. Right. So the way this came about was in the early 70s, or prior to the early 70s, ambulance services throughout the nation were kind of a hodgepodge of who was responding. And in many parts, if not most parts, it was actually the local undertakers that were the responding to emergency calls, which sounds kind of like a conflict of interest.
It certainly
right?
does.
But they were the ones that had the vehicles that were long enough to accommodate a body lying flat.
Okay.
Whether it was still a live body or a dead body. So they were actually doing that. And in the early 70s, the federal government, through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, basically recognized that there was the unrecognized emergency, which was patients dying from trauma that should not have died if they were able to get better care. And this was kind of an offshoot of what we learned from the military service, where in the I think in the Korean War was the first time when they started using helicopters to go out and pick up wounded military personnel and bringing them back to these MASH units, right?
Units,
The
sure.
famous MASH units that were fairly close to the front lines, but that they could start taking care of patients very quickly and then get them to a more definitive care. And so we knew that patients could be saved who had trauma, car accidents and other trauma, that were dying unnecessarily. And so the federal government put out what we call the white paper, saying we really need a more organized system. At that time, in Westport, prior to 1979, there was an ambulance in town. It was staffed pretty much by some volunteers. There was a gentleman who owned a garage, a mechanic. That's where the ambulance was kept. When a need for an ambulance came about, he dropped what he was doing.
That was the one right opposite the Humane Society.
I think it might have been. I believe his name was Bernie Stahersky or something like that. He would go out with the ambulance. A police officer would respond with him to the call, and then somebody hopefully had some medical training. One of them would drive. One of them would sit with the patient and take him to the hospital. But when the recognition for a better system was out there, the town of Westport looked at the different options for how to arrange it. Because the police were already kind of involved with it, they decided to move Westport EMS under the police department. A gentleman by the name of Ed Audley, who I think was a captain at the time in the police department, took over as the director of EMS and really built it up. So Westport EMS as an organization became under the police department, and as a way of staffing the ambulance and drawing volunteers, they also created Westport Volunteer EMS to recruit and train people in the EMS industry.
And what kind of numbers are we talking about in terms of volunteers?
Currently, we have about 65 volunteers. Some of them are extremely active. Some of them are putting in 10, 20 hours a week. Some of them are putting in 5 hours every other week or that kind of thing. So it really runs the gamut.
And I imagine the training is pretty rigorous.
Training is very rigorous. So to become an EMT, so I should also actually, before I even go into that, just, I think people kind of interchange because, again, they don't really recognize the difference between EMT and EMS. So EMS, Emergency Medical Service, would be kind of the equivalent of a police department or a fire department. They are the department, the agency that operates. EMT is the person, kind of like a police officer or fire officer. EMT stands for Emergency Medical Technician. It's kind of usually the basic level of training on an ambulance. It's about 200 hours of training, everything from bandaging to splinting to oxygen administration, childbirth, CPR, that kind of stuff. There's actually a slightly lower level called emergency medical responder. Most police officers and firefighters throughout the state are at that level because they're not actually operating on an ambulance. We actually have some EMRs that operate in the ambulances with us, and those are our high school kids.
Wow.
So you can become certified as an EMR as early as the age of 14. And you can become an EMT as long as you're 16 or older. So we have high school kids that have, since we instituted a youth corps or an explorer post back then, since about 2002 when we instituted it, we've had a lot of high school kids that volunteer with us, not only from Westport, but from other towns in the area because they don't have that program available to them.
And who is attracted to? Who wants to be an EMT or an EMR?
Again, that runs the gamut. We have had, as I said, high school kids that some of them just think it might be exciting. Some of them have an interest in possibly medicine. Some of them want to honestly put it onto their college resume. And that goes all the way up. We go all the way up to retired executives who are looking for something interesting to do and a way to give back to the community. So they take the EMT class and become volunteers.
And this town has, there's businesses, there's homes, we're on the water.
Yep. Two major highways that
Two
run
major
through us.
highways, a railroad. I would imagine there's a lot going on.
We keep busy. For a town our size, I think we have about 28,000 residents, and that number obviously balloons during the day when we have the businesses and visitors into town. We handle about 27 or 2,800 calls a year, which is, again, it keeps us busy.
That's several a day.
That's on average about 7 to 8 a day. Yep, in a 24-hour period. Now, a city like Norwalk does about 3 or 4 times that number based on their population and their density. But we are busy for a town our size. Other than Norwalk, like in the Norwalk Hospital catchment area, Darien, New Canaan, Wilton West, and Westport, we are by far the busiest service.
And give me an example of, there's no typical day. But
No, there's not.
what's a typical day? What are some of the calls that you respond to?
Everything from major traumas on the highways. Yesterday, a 2-car accident on Riverside Avenue. Nobody was very seriously injured, luckily, but because of the way the cars hit, one of the people had to be extricated by the fire department. They had to kind of tear open the car a little bit to be able to get him out. Cardiac arrests. We don't, thankfully, we don't have a lot of the city-type traumas. We don't have a lot of shootings and stabbings, but we have had them, as I'm sure you're well aware. I would say the majority of what we have are medical calls. Heart attacks, difficulty breathing, diabetics, seizure patients, stroke patients.
And what stands out? I mean, a couple of incidents where you look back and you say, yeah, this is why we do what we do.
Well, I would think that for anybody who's been in this a long enough time, I mentioned cardiac arrest, right? Difference between a heart attack and a cardiac arrest. Heart attack is where the heart, which is a muscle, either because of a blockage or whatever the reason, doesn't get enough oxygen, blood flow, and so as a muscle, it starts to die, okay? But people survive heart attacks. Cardiac arrest is when the heart actually stops. And the majority of those where they are actually resuscitatable there's an electrical issue that happens with the electrical conduction of the heart, and it's called a sudden cardiac arrest. And depending how quickly you can get to those patients and what is done beforehand will determine whether the patient actually survives it. I've been doing this professionally for 45 years. I did 20 years in New York City where we were extremely busy, right? A little bit less busy here in Westport. And I can literally count on one hand the number of times that I've had a cardiac arrest that survived. Wow. And that survived actually to being able to walk out of the hospital and have a really good life after that fact. Wow. And those are the ones that stand out. Yeah. Right. I had one in Westport, a patient who went into sudden cardiac arrest. She was in her car with her daughter, happened to be right across the street from our headquarters. Wow. She called immediately. Our guys got out there immediately, started doing CPR and compressions. I was the paramedic. I was coming from another location. I got there fairly quickly, did all the things that a paramedic does, which, by the way, is quite more extensive than what an EMT can do. Paramedics are almost like doctors on the street, with the exception of—
your paramedic
I got the
patch
paramedic patch on there. With the exception of things like surgery, anything medically that a doctor would do, for the most part, we do without the benefit of blood tests and x-rays and all that other stuff. But we start IVs, we administer medications, we, if necessary, put tubes down into people's lungs to breathe for them. And so when I got there, I did all those things. And within a few minutes, we got her heart started again. We transported her to the hospital. And about a week later, I got a phone call from the daughter.
Wow.
This was about 20 years ago.
And it still makes you
right?
emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, got the phone call from the daughter thanking us. And every year for the next 10, 15 years, but that's how long she survived,
Yeah.
leading a very active life. I would get a postcard or a letter every year on the anniversary of that date. So
Wow.
that's what we do it for.
Sure.
You know, we don't do it. Yes, there's some excitement of driving around with the lights and sirens going and all that kind of stuff. But that's not what we do it for. We do
Yeah.
it for making the difference in people's lives.
And what's your path? How did you end up doing what you do?
That's a great question. So I was a relatively squeamish kid growing up, but my parents, both of whom were European Jews, Holocaust survivors, neither of them was in the camps, but they were on the run and fighting for their lives in Germany and Luxembourg. They met here. I think maybe as stereotypical Jewish parents, you know, they always said, you should be a doctor. And
Or a lawyer.
I could never picture myself
Yeah.
being a doctor because I was, like I said, I was fairly squeamish. I went to Columbia University. I was not at that time very much into sports. I'm a little bit more now, but not so much. And so to get out of a gym requirement, they offered an option of taking CPR and first aid training. And so I did that. And I actually kind of found it really, really interesting. And right around that time, a friend of mine who was an EMT, he was trying to start a volunteer ambulance service on campus. And so he convinced me to take the EMT class. And shortly after a bunch of us took that class, we actually founded Columbia Area Volunteer Ambulance, which is now Columbia University EMS. And so that's how I got into it. My very first call was a cardiac arrest. It was a older woman on campus at a cocktail party who was choking on something, and we got her back.
Wow.
And that kind of sealed it for me that, oh, this is something really cool to do. So I volunteered doing that for 2 years, graduated college. I was pre-med, but I never really took it seriously enough to probably get into medical school. So graduated, didn't know what to do with myself, but I had this EMT card. And so I started applying around. I got hired by one of the hospitals in midtown Manhattan that ran an ambulances as part of the 911 system in New York. They hired me, and here I am now,
The rest is history.
40 plus years later.
And how did you end up in Westport from the city?
So I grew up in the city, and my wife and I got married in 1989. We're both native New Yorkers, but around that time, New York City was not necessarily the best place to raise kids. So we started looking around, and knew nothing about Westport or very little about Connecticut. But my father-in-law saw an article in the New York Times about how great Connecticut was. At that time, no state income tax.
Right.
Great schools, all that kind of stuff. And so we came up here and looked, and we said, yeah, this is a fantastic community that we wanted to be part of. So we moved up here in 1990. We now have 3 girls who are all grown up and all went through the town school system and did phenomenally with it. But after 10 years, I was doing the commute from here, from 90 into the city still for 10 years. And I was getting very burnt out with that commute. And as I was really starting to get kind of frustrated with it, a job opened up here for a paid paramedic crew chief. At the time in New York City, I had gone to NYU. I got a master's in public administration. I was running both the emergency room and the paramedic service for a hospital.
Wow.
But the chance to actually eliminate that commute and work in the town in which I lived, it was a couple of steps backwards professionally, but it was well worth it. And so that's how I ended up here.
And in all your years here, what have you learned about Westport? I mean, you must see parts of it and people that a lot of people don't. What
Yeah.
what did you learn?
I think one of the things that kind of struck me initially was, I knew this was an upper middle class to upper class community, very well to do, and when I moved here and started working here, I really found that yes, a good part of the town is that, but we also have some people that are not that well off. There's people both in some of the communities, some of the public housing that we have, as well as people who live in big houses but actually are not doing very well. And so that was a little bit of a surprise to me, which was actually kind of nice because I was used to dealing with different demographics in New York City. And the other thing was that I think I found that with a community like this, that with the income level, I expected people to be demanding, to know exactly what they wanted, et cetera, et cetera. But I found that people here are really, with some exceptions, are down to earth, and care about each other, and look out for each other. Again, our volunteers, they buy everything. So this is, they buy everything for the operation of the service, which means the town is not footing that bill through the budget. And the way that they are able to do that is through the generosity of people who live here, who give them money for their annual fundraising drive every year. Some who give a lot of money, and some who are, pensioners that are barely making ends will send $15, $25 because they feel it's important for this kind of service and for everybody to get the level of care that we're able to provide.
I am astonished that you have to raise, that the volunteers have to raise all their money.
Well, again, that's because this is the way it was set up in 1979. And so the volunteers have taken it upon themselves as part of their mission to do this fundraising, to buy all the capital equipment and the supplies, and they pay for a lot of the vehicle repairs as a way of giving back to the town and not having the town have to foot the bill through the budget. It's the amount of care that this town gets from EMS for the amount of money that it costs them is boggling, because we have a town budget which pays for the paid staff and a contract for Norwalk paramedics and some other stuff. But we also, just like virtually every EMS service in the country, we bill for our services. So even though the volunteers raise funds, we bill for every transport we do. Most of that money comes from people's insurance. We put back about 80% into the town's general fund, what we get from the town in our budget through that. So the town is getting an amazing bargain for a service that, like I said, paramedics on almost every call, available 24/7, 365. Yeah.
Give us a fundraising plea here. Where if somebody wants to donate, what do they do?
They can go to the website, the volunteers' website, which is www.westportems.org, and there's a tab for donations. They can call the volunteers' phone line, which is 203-341-6014. They can send an email to either president@westportems.org or treasurer@westportems.org. There are plenty of ways, and we are always looking for additional funds.
An ambulance cannot be cheap.
We are about to take delivery, hopefully in August or September, of 2 new ambulances that were purchased by the volunteers, and they are about $450,000 apiece. Wow. And that's just for the vehicle, not including the stuff that's inside them. We are the EKG monitor defibrillators that we have right now. We've had them for about 10 years. They're nearing their end of life cycle.
They're dying.
They're not dying. They're doing well. But the problem is that the manufacturer said they're at the point where they're not going to support them for very much longer. And so, we may be looking to purchase new ones of those. We're talking about $45,000 a piece, $50,000 a piece. Stretchers are about $35,000. When I started in EMS, we literally had to bend, have a stretcher. It was on the ground. We'd have to pick it up, twist to load the patient into the ambulance. I have numerous back strains and strains and sprains that I still feel pain. We now have devices in the ambulances that basically lift the stretchers up for us. So those things are another $35,000, $40,000 a piece. Things are expensive. Luckily, we've had some very, very generous donors who have actually paid for an ambulance on their own. The Westport Women's Club made an incredible donation. A couple of other organizations or individuals have. But the day-to-day operations, of what the volunteers pay for, the supplies, that type of stuff, it adds up as well. So again, $10, $15, whatever people can give is does not go to waste.
Sure. And you can buy Band-Aids.
And and it all goes again to supplies. None of it goes to. There's no payments to presidents or boards or anything like that. It all goes into the operation.
So I want to go back to Westport a bit. What is the most interesting place you've been that you never would have known about had it not been for work?
Oh, I think that's simple, and it's no longer around. And it was now I can't remember. It wasn't Crazy Vin's. It was the gay bar right across the street
Brook.
from the Brook. Thank you, the Brook.
Okay.
It was the Brook. I would have never known that was there, or Crazy Vin's, to be honest.
Right, the strip joint.
The strip joint.
The gay bar on one side, the strip joint on the other.
Yes.
Across from the state police barracks.
Exactly. In Westport.
Only in Westport.
So yeah, if I weren't working here, I'm not sure I would have. It would neither one of those places were places I normally would have gone into.
Sure.
But I love places like the Duck, the Black Duck, because Westport Institution.
Yeah.
Fun places like that. We have a lot of great places in town.
Do you think you've been to every place in Westport?
No, we'll get calls. I'll get calls where I hear the address and I know exactly who I'm going to, never mind where it is. And then I'll get a call on a street where I have to look it up in the map because I don't know that street, never been on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm pretty good with knowing where most of the town is now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's talk about emergency medicine nationally.
Yeah.
How has it changed in the years that you've been involved?
There's been tremendous change in terms of what we can do for patients. And also I think that science is playing a bigger part in determining what we can do in our treatment protocols. There are medications that we gave when I first started, 45 years ago, that if a doctor heard that I was giving that back then, what are you, crazy? That didn't help the patient. It actually may have done more harm for them.
Wow.
And so the science is now determining what we do. When I started, there's a procedure that we do now, and not a lot of the country does it. But we've had great success for it, thanks to our Norwalk Hospital is our medical control and doctors there, and the training we got. It's called rapid sequence intubation. So this is a procedure where if the patient is having enough difficulty breathing, but they're still conscious, we can actually sedate them, paralyze them, and pass a tube into their throat to assist them with breathing. Oh. Never would that have happened 40 years ago. And that's making a huge difference in survivability of some people. Sure. The one thing I think that has not changed, and that this is unfortunate, is that EMS is still, to a certain extent, and I think you alluded to it in the very beginning, kind of the forgotten stepchild of emergency services. And police and fire services are considered essential services. Which means that the state and or the municipalities, the towns, are required to provide that for the citizens. EMS is still not considered an essential service, believe it or not. We're very lucky in Westport that the town supports us really well, and we have the volunteers, but there is absolutely no requirement for the town of Westport or the state of Connecticut to provide EMS services to everybody in the state. Wow. And in a lot of parts of the country, that's to a real detriment. They are reliant on volunteers. The volunteer numbers are dwindling, and they're having a tremendous problem with providing EMS in some of the rural and even suburban areas. Yeah. So we're very lucky here, but I think that's something that the nation is going to have to address, is that 50 years after EMS started as a organized system, it's still not recognized as something that should be provided to everybody.
Not seen as an essential service, except by the people that you interact with. Do you get a lot of thanks, a lot of people who didn't realize what you do, and then all of a sudden
Well, I think we still surprise people with what we can do. The fact that we're going to start an IV and give you some medication, or give you your heart is racing and we'll give you a medication in the ambulance that's going to, bring it back to a normal level before you even get to the hospital. So yeah, there's definitely a level of gratitude. And when there's not, I think we all recognize the fact that even if it's something that to us doesn't seem like it's a really, truly critical issue, it might be, in our minds, this is a minor medical problem. To the people that are calling, for the most part, it's a problem for them. It may be even the worst day in their lives. Yeah. And so sometimes they're not in a position to really appreciate what we're doing or thank us for what we're doing, but we know that we're making a difference to them.
Sure. Do you train in that too? And the soft skills, the patient care? And
no, I think that most people that go into this, hopefully, and I know that when we interview volunteers, when we interview paid staff, we're looking for people that understand, that have a human side to them, that they're not just looking for the excitement of the adrenaline rush. That's not what we're looking for.
Sure.
And we've had people that I think probably would have been very good, but could not express in the interview process, or could not make us believe that they had that in them. And so, that's not somebody we want working for us.
Sure. This is great. I've learned a lot. Hopefully the viewers have as well. Any last message to the Westport community about Westport EMS and WVEMS?
Yeah, just when you see us pass, wave to us. We love being recognized, like anybody else. Support our volunteers through their fundraising drives. Learn CPR. We have a very active CPR training program. Doing CPR. When somebody has a cardiac arrest, it can take us typically anywhere from 3 to 8 minutes to get to you from the time the call is made. If somebody's not doing CPR, and that during that time, by the time we get there, it's probably going to be too late. So learn CPR, learn first aid, and if you have any interest in doing this, please, contact us. We run EMT classes a couple times a year. We're finishing up one right now. Probably the next one will probably be in September. We're always looking for good people.
Great. And when you see those lights in the rearview mirror,
get to the right.
Pull over.
Pull over to the right. If you're in the left lane, don't pull over across the double yellow to let us go through. Can't tell you how many times we've had people do that. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, pull to the right. And if you're coming in the opposite traffic, the law says pull over to the shoulder and stop.
Good to know.
Yep.
Marc Hartog, Deputy Director of Westport Emergency
EMS.
Medical Service. And it's one service or two?
Westport Emergency Medical Service.
There you go. Thank you for being on 06880, the podcast, and for letting people know exactly what you and your colleagues do. It's fantastic.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate being here.
You bet.